welcome everybody. Thank you so much for choosing us rather than the Central Vista. Kartavya Path, sorry. So we really appreciate your coming all the way here, and I hope you have no problems getting back. Also, happy Onam, the celebration of a clear sky after 3 months of rain in Kerala, when the boats joyfully set out to sea. And every year, it was in September, that Simon Digby would arrive like a migratory bird and pitch camp in Delhi, here in the IIC during the day, from where he would then take off on his travels, and by the next year, there'd be another manuscript ready. In November 2009, weeks before Simon was diagnosed with the cancer that took him from us, I suggested that his writings, scattered through so many journals, should be gathered into 2 volumes. He smiled and said, impossible. It will take another 2 lifetimes to do that. But what we realize now, that is, it doesn't have to. When you hear Francesca, who's managed the Herculean task of bringing all his papers and writings together, and it's going to be published soon. You'll have more on that from her later. Soon after that, he was no longer able to come here to the IIC veranda, where he was such a familiar figure. He is one of IIC's beloved ghosts, like Ramu Gandhi. Sometimes one imagines he's sitting there, leaning on his stake with a half smile on his face. I last saw him 2 days before the end. It was my turn now to try and amuse him, while he responded with a very faint smile, answering slowly but intelligibly. He was looking backward and forward. He had begun to write down memories of his childhood, and on a clipboard, he wrote clear directions for what was to be done in the case of his death. 3 sets, 1 for Britain, 1 for Pakistan, 1 for India. So it was the Yamuna in Delhi that carried his ashes away to the sea. There are so many people we have lost in the last dozen years, but some seem to be still around with us. Simon was a one-person turning point in South Asian historiography. His peculiar genius unfolded slowly in so many directions. The vast geographical expanse he covered on his magic carpet, like an Ibn Khaldun or an al-Biruni. His easy knowledge of languages, like an Abdul Rahim. Towards when he was in his last days, we found an incomplete exercise book from his last month, which showed that he was learning the Bangla script in his beautiful calligraphic style. He had a deepening empathy with generations of Sufis, had a fascination for crafts and scripts, till we were like Oliver Goldsmith's villagers, and still they gazed and still their wonder grew, that one small head could carry all he knew. And it is we who are the richer. Simon, so much his own person and not identified with an institution, has become an institution. And all because, as I said, of the tireless work, the selfless work of Francesca and her team. What a great debt we owe to them for setting themselves the daunting task of collecting Simon's work into 10 majestic volumes. And meanwhile, soon, towards the end, we'll show you the jewel box of a book where 17 scholars have paid homage to his method. This is a remarkable moment, actually, when all kinds of exciting possibilities open up and we can free ourselves from the national narrative and rejoice in the detail. Scholarship and serendipity can go hand in hand. The chirag will set many other lamps alight. God knows that our students desperately need such wonder tales now, mediated by dedication to rediscover their own country. Now, my only excuse for being here is that I was acquainted with him long before many of you in the audience were born. In 1970, 52 years ago, I presented a paper at a seminar in Oxford with some trepidation. In the event, everyone forgot whatever I had said, and we were absorbed by an excited impromptu talk by Simon. And Dr. S. Gopal smiled and said with a twinkle in his eye, I knew that this paper would make Simon go off into a fine frenzy. Since then, we met on and off in England and in Delhi. Francesca quotes Aditya Behel saying that Simon taught so much through conversation. With me, these were not always conversations. I like to think of him not as a historian so much, but as a kissago. Two other people had that quality of magicking up another time, Richard Cobb and Bernard Cohn. As Simon spoke and laughed, we all listened raptly. He held forth effortlessly on war horses or toy soldiers, rode across the Deccan or Ladakh, or described his own journey to Bombay as a child. His mother, being a gifted artist, might partly explain his pleasure at art, jewelry, and metal craft. This is a rather beautiful view of very evocative view of Pachmani done by Violet Digby, which Simon made into a postcard and was using repeatedly. But, and not being tied down to an academic career gave him the freedom to do what he enjoyed. But there was a method in his madness, a discipline in his delight. And he was a true fakir who gave unstintingly of his time and his wisdom to everyone. Barbara Metcalf described him beautifully. So learned, so generous, and just himself. So that is what we have to take away. Admiration for his scholarship, yes, but even more for his generosity. He left the world a better place. Now we are going to listen to some 4 people who will be talking about him and about his work. And I first would like to introduce Professor Ikdar Alam Khan, who was a
She wants you to look at the audience. maybe. आजे इधर आ जाइए.
इधर को घुमा लीजिए.
मैं छू नहीं सकती.
Ikdar Sahab has been very kind and come for this function, but
she doesn't want you to come here. She wants you to sit here, but just see the audience. They want you to sit there. You sit there.
It would be easier for him if somebody else read out his piece. He's written it, but it will be read by our Delhi storyteller, Suhail Hashmi.
Hello.
I don't need to introduce Suhail to a Delhi audience. Everybody knows him. And he will now be speaking, reading out what Ikdar Sahab had kindly contributed to the.
एक तो इसे इसका साइज देख के डरिएगा मत. इसको मैंने एनलार्ज कर लिया है ताकि मैं आसानी से पढ़ सकूं. ये इक़्तिदार साहब ने एक छोटा सा मकाला लिखा है जिसका उन्वान है अजब मानूस अजनबी था वो. He was a strangely familiar stranger. ये मेरा तर्जुमा है, गलत भी हो सकता है. साइमन डिग्बी साहब से पहली बार कहाँ और कब मिला ठीक से याद नहीं है, लेकिन इतना ज़रूर याद है कि जब वो पहली बार मिले थे तो शायद लंदन यूनिवर्सिटी में किसी जगह को थोड़ी देर की गुफ्तगू के बाद ही मैंने यूँ महसूस किया जैसे उनको अरसे से जानता हूँ. उन्होंने जिस गर्मजोशी और बेतकल्लुफ़ी से तबादला ख्यालात किया वो मेरे लिए वहाँ के अजनबी माहौल में एक दिल खुशकुन तजुर्बा था. उस वक्त तक मेरे जहन में किसी अंग्रेज़ का तसव्वुर बड़ी हद तक नक चढ़े ज़िला हक्काम और उनकी बेगमात کو دور سے دیکھنے تک محدود تھا، جو بسا اوقات ہمارے قائم گنج کے مکان پر بطور مہمان آتے تھے۔ ان موقعوں پر لی گئی کئی تصویریں قائم گنج کی کوٹھی کے ڈرائنگ روم میں آویزاں تھیں۔ ان فوٹوگرافوں میں بعض اوقات ہمارے خاندان کا کوئی بچہ کسی میم صاحب کے پاس کھڑا یا بیٹھا نظر آ جاتا ہے۔ جو تصویریں مجھے یاد ہیں ان میں یہ مرتبہ عموماً میرے چچا زاد بھائی بدر عالم خان کو ملا کرتا تھا۔ ان تصویروں میں وہ ایک مخصوص قسم کی اونچی ٹوپی زیب تن کیے کسی میم کی بغل میں کھڑے یا سامنے فرش پر براجمان نظر آتے ہیں۔ انگریز افراد سے میرے ابتدائی تجربے میں ایک غیر تہذیب کے لوگوں سے دور کی دلچسپی اور ان کے ساتھ ایک طرح کے خوف اور تجسس کے ملے جلے تاثرات تلاش کیے جا سکتے ہیں۔ دراصل نوعمری کے عہد میں، میرا خیال ہے یہ فتح گڑھ ہے، کہ قیام کے دوران ایک ایسا واقعہ پیش آیا جس نے میرے لاشعور میں انگریزوں کے لیے ایک طرح کی نفرت اور خوف کے ملے جلے تاثرات پیدا کر دیے۔ یہ واقعہ اس زمانے کا ہے جب میں ایک ایسے مکان میں رہتا تھا جس کے سامنے پریڈ گراؤنڈ میں ملکہ وکٹوریہ کا اونچا سا مجسمہ نصب تھا۔ لوگوں کو وہاں گھومنے پھرنے کی اجازت تھی۔ مقامی ہاکی اور فٹ بال کی ٹیموں کے درمیان میچ اکثر یہیں ہوا کرتے تھے۔ پریڈ گراؤنڈ کے اسی حصے میں پوسٹ آفس اور ڈاک بنگلے کی عمارتیں واقع تھیں۔ شاید اسی وجہ سے شہر کے لوگوں کو وہاں آنے جانے کی اجازت تھی، لیکن ان اوقات میں جب انگریزوں کو ورزش یا پریڈ کی ٹریننگ کی غرض سے لایا جاتا تھا، انڈین آبادی کے وہاں جانے پر روک لگا دی جاتی تھی۔ ایک بار وہاں ملکہ وکٹوریہ کے مجسمے سے ذرا ہٹ کر ہاکی میدان کے قریب فوجی ٹریننگ کی غرض سے ایک نیچی سی دیوار اور بندوقیں رکھ کر نشانہ سادھنے کی جگہیں بنائی جانے لگی، تو محلہ تلیہ لائن یا جو بھی نام ہے، میں آئی کانٹ ریڈ اٹ پراپرلی، کہ بچوں نے شاید یہ محسوس کیا کہ جو جگہ سول آبادی کی ہوا خوری اور کھیل کود کی غرض سے خالی چھوڑ دی گئی ہے، اب اس کو فوجی ٹریننگ کے لیے مخصوص کیا جا رہا ہے۔ یہی وہ زمانہ تھا جب ملک بھر میں کانگریس کے بھارت چھوڑو آندولن کے زیر اثر انگریز حکمرانوں کے خلاف عام ناراضگی بڑھ رہی تھی۔ میں نہیں کہہ سکتا ہوں کہ یہ کس طرح شروع ہوا اور ایسا کرنے میں ہمارا موقف کیا تھا۔ ہم لوگوں نے، یعنی محلہ تلیہ لائن کے بچوں نے، جو پریڈ گراؤنڈ پر گھومنے یا کھیلوں میں شریک ہونے کی غرض سے اکثر اکٹھا ہوتے تھے، یہ وتیرہ بنا لیا کہ سول آبادی کے قریب بنائی گئی چھوٹی موٹی فوجی تیمارات کو خراب کر دیا کرتے تھے۔ اس کام میں میرے کئی دوست تفریحاً حصہ لیتے تھے، بعض اوقات میں بھی ان کے ساتھ ہوتا تھا۔ ہمیں نہیں معلوم تھا کہ ہماری اس حرکت کو ان فوجی حکام نے، جو تعمیرات کی نگہداشت پر مامور تھے، ضرورت سے زیادہ سنجیدگی سے لیا تھا۔ ایک روز جب ہم لوگ شام کے وقت ایک نئی تعمیر شدہ چاند ماری کی غرض سے بنوائی گئی نیچی سی دیوار پر بیٹھے اس کی اینٹیں ادھر ادھر پھینک رہے تھے کہ یکایک ایک نوجوان انگریز افسر تیزی سے سائیکل چلا کر وہاں پہنچ گیا اور ہمیں رنگے ہاتھوں پکڑ لیا۔ جہاں تک مجھے یاد ہے وہ غصے کا اظہار ضرور کر رہا تھا، لیکن ہم لوگوں کو نکل بھاگنے کا موقع بھی دے رہا تھا۔ اس کا بظاہر اندیہ بس اس قدر معلوم ہوتا تھا کہ ہم ڈر جائیں اور آئندہ چاند ماری سے تعلق رکھنے والی تعمیرات کو نقصان پہنچانے سے باز رہیں۔ یہ دراصل میرے وہ تاثرات ہیں جو کسی قدر ہوش سنبھالنے کے بعد میری سوچ کا حصہ بن سکے۔ اس وقت تو ہم لوگ بہر صورت یہ محسوس کرتے تھے کہ پریڈ گراؤنڈ کی چھوٹی موٹی تعمیرات کو نقصان پہنچا کر ہم نک چڑھے انگریز فوجی افسروں کو منہ چڑھا رہے۔ 1942 کے واقعات کے پس منظر میں بعض بچوں کے لیے یہ ایک وطن پرستانہ کارروائی تھی۔ بہر صورت اس واقعے سے میں بہت ڈر گیا تھا۔ اتنا کے بعد میں سوچ کر شرم سی آتی تھی۔ اب میں سوچتا ہوں ابتدائی عمر میں بہت عرصے تک انگریز افراد کو دیکھ کر مجھ پر جو ایک طرح کی ٹینشن سی طاری ہو جاتی تھی، شاید بچپن کے ایسے ہی تجربات کا نتیجہ تھی۔ 1970 میں جب مجھے برٹش کاؤنسل کے ایک پروگرام کے تحت انگلینڈ میں رہ کر اپنی ریسرچ کو توسیع دینے کا موقع ملا، تو ابتدا میں اس عادت کی وجہ سے بہت سی دقتوں کا سامنا کرنا پڑا۔ SOAS میں کام کرتے وقت مجھے مطلع کیا گیا کہ اپنی ریسرچ کے سلسلے میں پروفیسر برنارڈ لوئس سے رجوع کر سکتا ہوں. 1 یا 2 بار ان سے ملاقات کا موقع بھی ملا. انہوں نے میری ریسرچ کے موضوع کی بابت کئی سوال کیے اور مشورے بھی دیے. ان کی گفتگو سے خاصی ہمت افزائی ہوئی، لیکن چند ابتدائی ملاقاتوں کے بعد ہی مجھ پر یہ واضح ہو گیا کہ جس میدان میں ریسرچ شروع کرنے کا ارادہ کیا تھا وہ اسی صورت میں کارآمد ثابت ہو سکتا تھا کہ ترکی زبان پر اس حد تک عبور ہو کہ عثمانی ترکی میں جو دستاویزات کو پڑھ کر ان میں مہیا اطلاعات کو نہ صرف سمجھ سکوں بلکہ ان کے تجزیے کی بنا پر سماجی اور سیاسی اداروں کی نوعیت اور کارکردگی کے بارے میں کوئی ایک آئی کانٹ ریڈ دس ورڈ رائے بنائی جا سکے، صائب رائے بنائی جا سکے. میں دراصل پروفیسر برنارڈ لوئس کا ہمیشہ شکر گزار رہا کہ انہوں نے میرے اکیڈمک کیریئر کے اس ابتدائی دور میں مجھے ایک ایسے میدان میں تحقیق کرنے سے باز رکھا جس کے ماخذ کی زبانوں سے میں بخوبی واقف نہیں تھا. لیکن اس بات کا کریڈٹ پوری طرح سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کو جاتا ہے کہ انہوں نے مجھے اس وقت کی اپنی ریسرچ جو پوری طرح عہد وسطیٰ کے ہندوستان پر مرکوز تھی کی اہمیت کا احساس دلایا اور اس میدان کو چھوڑ کر عثمانی سلطنت کے سیاسی اداروں کی بابت تحقیق پر وقت خراب کرنے سے باز رکھا. اس طرح میں ایسی صورتحال سے محفوظ رہا جہاں میرا ریسرچ پروگرام بالآخر ایسے موضوعات کی طرف چل نکلتا جن کے ماخذ کی زبان سے میں اچھی طرح واقف نہیں تھا. اس وقت تک ہندوستان کے عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ میں نے جو کام کیا تھا اس کی اہمیت اور مزید توجہ کی ضرورت کا احساس دلانے میں سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کا بہت ہاتھ رہا ہے. ہندوستانی عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ اور اس کے ماخذ کی بابت ان کی عالمانہ گفتگو کا اثر تھا کہ انگلستان پہنچ کر عثمانی سلطنت کے سیاسی اداروں کی بابت ریسرچ کے اپنے منصوبے کو بدل کر میں دوبارہ مغلیہ عہد کی تاریخ کی طرف متوجہ ہوا. دراصل سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کی صلاح پر ہی میں نے لندن کے دوران قیام عہد وسطیٰ کے ہندوستان میں آتشی ہتھیاروں کے استعمال پر مواد جمع کرنا شروع کر دیا تھا، جو بالآخر 2006 میں میری کتاب گن پاؤڈر اینڈ فائر آرمز کی صورت میں سامنے آیا. مجھے یہ تسلیم کرتے ہوئے بہت خوشی محسوس ہوتی ہے کہ ہندوستان میں آتشی اسلحہ کے استعمال کی بابت میری کتاب جس کو آکسفورڈ یونیورسٹی پریس نے شائع کیا ہے، بڑی حد تک اس ہمت افزائی اور رہنمائی کی مرہون منت ہے جو پروفیسر عرفان حبیب اور سائمن ڈگبی ایسے رفیقوں سے ہمیشہ ملتی رہی. میری اسی کتاب میں ابتدائی عہد کے آتشی اسلحہ کے کئی فوٹوگراف اور ان کی بابت اطلاعات جو مختلف جگہوں پر محفوظ ہیں مجھے سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کے توسط سے ہی مل سکیں. اس بات کا میں نے اپنی کتاب میں اعتراف کیا ہے، یہاں تک کہ کتاب کے سر ورق پر دکن میں بنائی گئی مشہور توپ ملک میدان ہوگا میرا خیال میں کی تصویر بھی انہی کی کھینچی ہوئی. مجھے اس بات کا اعتراف کرنے میں بڑی خوشی محسوس ہوتی ہے کہ ہندوستان کی تاریخ کی بابت میں جو کچھ لکھ سکا اس ریسرچ میں پروفیسر نور الحسن اور پروفیسر عرفان حبیب کے بعد سب سے زیادہ جس شخص کا میں مرہون منت ہوں وہ سائمن ڈگبی تھے. اگر لندن کی قیام کے دوران میری ان سے ملاقات نہ ہوئی ہوتی تو شاید آتشی اسلحہ کی بابت اپنی کتاب تیار کرنے میں ویسی کامیابی حاصل نہ کر پاتا جیسی بعض ماہرین کے خیال میں اس کتاب میں نظر آتی. مجھے ایک بات پر ہمیشہ تعجب رہا کہ میرے استاد پروفیسر نور الحسن سے سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کے ویسے مخلصانہ تعلقات نہ بن سکے جیسے کہ ان کے اور پروفیسر عرفان حبیب کے دوران ہمیشہ نظر آئے. ڈگبی صاحب جب بھی علی گڑھ آتے تھے وہ عرفان حبیب سے ملنے ضرور جاتے تھے. عموماً وہ ڈپارٹمنٹ آف ہسٹری کے اس کمرے میں سب سے پہلے پہنچتے تھے جہاں عرفان صاحب عموماً اپنے ہم خیال اساتذہ اور طلباء کے ساتھ گفتگو کرتے مل سکتے تھے. اس کے برخلاف میں نے انہیں کبھی پروفیسر حبیب اور پروفیسر نور الحسن سے ملنے کی کوشش کرتے یا ان سے ہندوستان کی تاریخ پر جاری ریسرچ کے مسائل پر گفتگو کرتے نہیں دیکھا. یہاں یہ یاد رکھنے والی بات ہے کہ سائمن ڈگبی نے علی گڑھ اس وقت آنا شروع کیا جب یہ دونوں بزرگ شعبے کے معاملات سے دوری اختیار کر چکے تھے، لیکن یہاں پر جاری ریسرچ اور عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ کی بابت جاری نقطۂ نظر پر ان دونوں کی فکر کی چھاپ بے شک موجود تھی۔ سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کی تحریروں میں علی گڑھ میں جاری ریسرچ کی بابت جو تاثر ملتا ہے اسے آیا ہے کہ وہ ان دنوں کی نسبت پروفیسر عرفان حبیب کو یہاں پر جاری ریسرچ کا اصل روح رواں گردانتے تھے۔ انہوں نے جس طرح بعض اہم مسائل پر پروفیسر نظامی اور اطہر عباس رضوی کی آراء سے اختلاف ظاہر کیا ہے، وہ اس بات کی تصدیق کرتا ہے۔ ایسا نہیں ہے کہ ان بزرگوں نے اپنے مخصوص میدانوں میں جو کام کیا ہے اس کی اہمیت کو انہیں اندازہ نہ رہا ہو۔ لیکن اس کے ساتھ وہ بعض ان اسکالروں کے کام پر سخت تنقید میں روح رعایت نہیں کرتے تھے جن کو سامنے لانے میں ان دونوں نے اہم رول ادا کیا ہے۔ دراصل سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کا ذکر علی گڑھ کے شعبہ تاریخ میں سب سے پہلے اس وقت پہنچا جب انہوں نے پروفیسر خلیق احمد نظامی کی ایک کتاب پر تبصرہ کیا جس میں عہد وسطیٰ کے ہندوستان کی سلطنتوں میں صوفی سلسلوں کے اثرات کا ذکر ہے۔ اس تبصرے کا اہم پہلو یہ تھا کہ اس میں غیر معروضی طرز استدلال سے بحث کے ساتھ یہ ثابت کیا گیا تھا کہ اکثر جگہوں پر صوفی مسلک کے تعلق سے ماخذ کے بیانات کو یا تو مصنف بخوبی سمجھنے سے قاصر ہیں یا دانستہ طور خصوصاً پروفیسر عرفان حبیب کی دانشورانہ رہنمائی میں اپنا دائرہ اثر پذیر کر رہا تھا۔ اس کے بعد سائمن ڈگبی صاحب علی گڑھ میں عہد وسطیٰ پر کام کرنے والے اسکالروں کے اس حلقے کے بہت قریب آ گئے جو فرقہ وارانہ نقطۂ نظر سے عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ کو مسخ کرنے کی کوششوں کے خلاف صف آرا تھے۔ اس سلسلے میں ایک بات جو کبھی میری سمجھ میں نہیں آئی یہ تھی کہ سائمن ڈگبی صاحب اور اطہر عباس رضوی صاحب کے درمیان بسا اوقات ماخذ کے متنوں کے معنی سمجھنے میں اس حد تک اختلاف پیدا ہو جاتا تھا کہ وہ ایک دوسرے کے اتنے ہی متشدد مخالف نظر آتے تھے جیسے کہ پروفیسر نظامی کے۔ اسرائیل کے کسی شہر میں ایک سیمینار کے دوران سائمن ڈگبی صاحب اور اطہر عباس رضوی کے درمیان ہندوستان میں صوفی سلسلوں کی تاریخ کی بابت کسی بحث کے سوال جواب کی ایک کہانی بہت مشہور ہوئی۔ کہا جاتا ہے کہ اس بحث کا خاتمہ اس طرح ہوا کہ اطہر عباس صاحب اونچی آواز میں فریاد کرتے ہوئے سیمینار سے اٹھ کر چلے گئے۔ اس لیے میں سمجھ سکتا ہوں کہ اس زمانے میں بھی جب ڈاکٹر نور الحسن علی گڑھ میں موجود تھے، ڈگبی صاحب وہاں آتے تھے تو شعبہ تاریخ میں عرفان حبیب سے ملنے ضرور پہنچتے تھے، لیکن میں نے انہیں پروفیسر خلیق احمد نظامی سے ملنے کے لیے ان کے کمرے یا مکان پر جا کر تبادلہ خیالات کرتے کبھی نہیں دیکھا۔ اس کے ساتھ میرا ہمیشہ تاثر رہا کہ علی گڑھ مسلم یونیورسٹی کے شعبہ تاریخ میں جاری ایک طرح کے نظریاتی اختلافات یا مباحث کے دوران وہ بسا اوقات اس نقطۂ نظر کے زیادہ قریب تھے جس کی نمائندگی پروفیسر نور الحسن کرتے تھے، اور شاید یہی وجہ ہے کہ پروفیسر اطہر عباس رضوی جن کو نور الحسن صاحب سے بہت خصوصیت تھی سے فارسی متنوں کے معنی کے تعلق سے اپنے اختلافات کے باوجود سائمن ڈگبی صاحب نے کسی بھی اسٹیج پر نظامی صاحب کے ان بیانات اور متنوں کی تشریح کو قابل غور نہیں سمجھا، جہاں انہوں نے علی گڑھ میں جاری ریسرچ کے ایسے پہلوؤں کو مسترد کرنے کی کوشش کی ہے جن میں بنیادی طور پر اقلیت پسند نقطۂ نظر جاری نظر آتا ہے۔ ان مسائل پر انہوں نے جب بھی کسی مباحثے میں اپنی بات رکھی وہ ہمیشہ اس نظریاتی پہلو کی حمایت کرتے نظر آئے جس سے فرقہ وارانہ طرز استدلال کی نفی ہوتی تھی۔ ہندوستان کی بعض دستگاہوں میں جاری عہد وسطیٰ کی ہسٹری کی بابت ریسرچ میں اپنی گہری دلچسپی کی بنا پر ڈگبی صاحب بار بار یہاں آتے رہتے تھے۔ دراصل ابتدا میں عہد وسطیٰ کے صوفی سلسلوں کی تاریخ میں ان کی دلچسپی انہیں بار بار پاکستان کھینچ لے جاتی تھی۔ انہوں نے اپنی پہلی کتاب وار ہارس اینڈ ایلیفینٹس کی کراچی سے شائع کروائی تھی، لیکن اس میں شک نہیں ہے کہ جب یہ کتاب شائع ہوئی اس وقت تک وہ علی گڑھ میں عرفان حبیب صاحب کی قیادت میں جاری ریسرچ سے نہ صرف بخوبی واقف ہو چکے تھے بلکہ اپنے آپ کو بڑی حد تک اس معروضی طرز فکر سے متخصص کرتے تھے، آئیڈینٹیفائی کرتے تھے، تشخیص، جس کو بعض لوگوں نے علی گڑھ اسکول کا نام دیا ہے۔ ڈگبی صاحب نے اپنی پہلی کتاب وار ہارس اینڈ ایلیفینٹس 2 اشخاص کے نام معنون کی ہے، ایک پروفیسر پیٹر ہارڈی جنہوں نے ہندوستانی تاریخ میں عام دلچسپی کو برقرار رکھنے میں اہم رول ادا کیا، اور دوسرا یہ خاکسار جس کے میں نہیں اقتدار صاحب، اور دوسرا یہ خاکسار جس کے مخلصانہ امور پر حجت کے رویے کا نہایت مشفقانہ انداز میں ذکر ہے۔ اپنی پہلی مارکت العرا کتاب میں میرے ایسے نوسیکھیے کے نام لندن یونیورسٹی کے ایک مقتدر پروفیسر کے ساتھ لکھنے میں بظاہر ان کا یہی منشا تھا کہ علی گڑھ میں جاری سیکولر نقطۂ نظر کی حامل ریسرچ کی ہمت افزائی کی جائے۔ شاید اس طرح وہ ان تمام لوگوں کی توجہ جو اس وقت ہندوستان کے عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ میں دلچسپی رکھتے تھے علی گڑھ میں ہو رہی ریسرچ کی طرف مبذول کرانا چاہتے تھے، جن کی سب سے زیادہ درخشندہ نمائندہ تو ظاہر ہے عرفان صاحب اور اطہر علی صاحب کی کتابیں تھیں، لیکن ان کے خیال میں میرے ایسے معمولی اسکالر بھی جو کام کر رہے تھے وہ نوٹ کیے جانے کے لائق تھا۔ پچھلی صدی کی آخری 2 دہائیوں کے دوران سائمن ڈگبی صاحب کا ہندوستان آنے کا سلسلہ تواتر سے جاری رہا۔ وہ جب بھی آتے تھے مطلع کر دیتے تھے، مجھے اپنے پروگرام سے مطلع کر دیتے تھے۔ ان کے ایسے خطوط کا جن میں وہ مختلف جگہوں پر جا کر ماخذ کی تلاش اور مطالعے کا اکثر ذکر کرتے تھے، ایک بڑا ذخیرہ تیار ہو گیا تھا۔ ڈگبی صاحب کے انتقال کے بعد وہ تمام خطوط میں نے ایک جگہ دے دیے جن کے بارے میں خیال تھا کہ وہاں سے ان کا انتخاب شائع ہو جائے گا۔ مجھے افسوس ہے کہ میری یہ توقع ابھی تک پوری نہیں ہوئی۔ اب یہاں ایک کریکشن ہے، جب یہ لکھا گیا تھا پرسوں، اس کے بعد وہ خط مل گئے ہیں اور وہ خط ان کی بیٹی کے پاس ہے۔ اب یہ شاید یہ جلدی چھپ جائیں گے۔ اپنی زندگی کے آخری چند برسوں کے دوران ڈگبی صاحب کا بار بار ہندوستان آنے کا سلسلہ بڑھ گیا تھا۔ اس دوران ہندوستان کی بدلتی ہوئی سیاسی صورتحال کی دلچسپی کا ایک ایسا رخ سامنے آیا جس کا اس موقع سے پہلے مجھے کوئی اندازہ نہیں ہوا تھا۔ جب اندرا گاندھی نے ایمرجنسی نافذ کی تو اس وقت ان کی ہمدردیاں ہندوستان میں جمہوریت کے تحفظ کی خاطر جاری جدوجہد سے کس حد تک گہری تھیں، اس بات کا اندازہ اس وقت ہوا جب ایک بار کسی بات پر دل برداشتہ ہو کر میں نے اسٹاف کلب میں بعض دوستوں کی موجودگی میں یہ کہہ دیا تھا کہ آئندہ ایمرجنسی کے خلاف ہونے والے کسی اجتماعی پروٹیسٹ میں شریک ہونے سے باز رہوں گا۔ اس وقت اتفاق سے سائمن ڈگبی صاحب بھی موجود تھے۔ انہوں نے جس جوش سے میرے اس بیان کی مخالفت کی، اس سے ظاہر تھا کہ وہ ہندوستان میں جاری سیاسی صورتحال میں جمہوری اقدار کی حمایت میں کسی بھی حد تک جا سکتے تھے، بلا اس بات کی پرواہ کیے کہ سرکاری ایجنسیاں ہر حریت پسند آواز کو پوری طرح کچل دینے پر نہایت بے شرمی کے ساتھ آمادہ تھیں۔ اپنی زندگی کے آخری چند برسوں کے دوران ڈگبی صاحب کا ہندوستان آنے کا سلسلہ بڑھ گیا تھا۔ وہ ہر چند ماہ کے بعد مجھے مطلع کرتے تھے کہ ہندوستان آ رہے ہیں، اور ہر بار ایک چکر نیپال کا ضرور لگتا تھا۔ نیپال میں ڈگبی صاحب کا کیا سلسلہ تھا اس کا انہوں نے کبھی ذکر نہیں کیا، لیکن ظاہر ہے وہ نیپال عہد وسطیٰ کی تاریخ کے ماخذ کی تلاش میں نہیں جاتے تھے۔ وہاں ان کی بعض ایسی دلچسپیاں تھیں جن کا ذکر انہوں نے ضروری نہیں سمجھا۔ ایک بار جب وہ نیپال کے سفر سے واپس آئے تو ان کے ساتھ ایک 10-12 برس کا لڑکا بھی تھا جو اپنی شکل صورت سے پہاڑی نژاد ہی معلوم ہوتا تھا۔ ڈگبی صاحب نے اس بچے کو اپنے بیٹے کے طور پر متعارف کیا۔ اس موقع کے بعد وہ ایک بار اور علی گڑھ تشریف لائے تھے، تب ان کا پہاڑی بیٹا ان کے ساتھ نہیں تھا۔ ڈگبی صاحب کی گفتگو سے میں نے یہ اندازہ لگایا کہ وہ اس بچے کے حالات سے دل برداشتہ سے تھے اور اس کی بابت گفتگو سے بچتے تھے۔ फिर एक सन का जिक्र है जो सन नहीं लिखा गया है, सन फला फला में डिग्बी साहब बहुत बीमार हो गए। उस वक्त वो इंग्लैंड में थे। बीमारी के दौरान उन्होंने अंदिया जाहिर किया कि उन्हें हिंदुस्तान पहुंचा दिया जाए। यहाँ आने के चंद रोज़ बाद ही उनका इंतकाल हो गया। बीमारी के हालत में उनके दिल्ली आ जाने की खबर सुनकर बहुत से दोस्त और मद्दा उनकी मिजाज पुरसी के लिए दिल्ली पहुँचे। अलीगढ़ से इरफान हबीब साहब अपने कई रफ़ीक़ों के साथ गए थे। दिल्ली पहुंचने के चंद रोज़ बाद ही डिग्बी साहब इंतकाल कर गए। हिंदुस्तानी तारीख़ की नवीसों के एक बड़े मजमे ने उन्हें दिल्ली में सुपुर्द खाक किया। शुक्रिया।
That was a lovely story of a long association. Professor Ikdar Sahab himself has been in an institution in Aligarh, AAMU, from 1961 to 1994. And now there is another person who has not been able to come, but who's also known Simon, who from earlier times, from 90, so close. We are all 1969, Ikdar Sahab and this gentleman and me. So I would like to call Dr. Panchapakeshan to come and read out the tribute from Ratindranath Sen, who is a mathematical physicist, now living in Israel, who knew Simon again from about 1959. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Panchapakeshan. I studied in Delhi University, and I've been in part of Delhi University all my life. And my classmate Ratindranath Sen passed out from Lucknow and came to Delhi and did BSc Honours Physics and MA Mathematics, and was in Goyer Hall from 1954 to 1959. And then he became very friendly with Simon Digby, and he wrote me a letter from which I will read out Mr. Sen's account of his friendship with Simon Digby. He says, Simon, Aparna, Prahlad, Amartya and Jamal were contemporaries in Cambridge. Simon, of course, is Simon Digby. Aparna is Aparna Basu, who was professor of history in Delhi University later on, after being in Cambridge. Prahlad was her husband, Prahlad Basu. Amartya Sen, of course, everybody knows very well. And Jamal Nazrul Islam also is well known. Aparna was in Newnham in Cambridge, Prahlad in King's, and the other three in Trinity College. After his tripos, Simon obtained a grant from the Worshipful Company of Goldsmiths, which brought him to Goyer Hall. That is where we met. This is Ratin Sen saying. He quickly got fed up with Goyer Hall, atrocious food, and dug up a flat at the beginning of Timarpur Road. Simon and I shared that flat for about 1 year. It was there that he wrote his fellowship dissertation for Trinity College. Mostly at night, wearing only a lungi, sprawled on his belly, head raised on his elbows, typing away on his Olivetti littera. He became known as the Nanga Sahib in the neighborhood. He also acquired a large number of old books in Urdu and Persian from the alleys of Old Delhi. He was not elected to the fellowship. Amartya was. Aparna commented that Trinity has lost a good historian, but Amartya is a good economist. Simon never quite got over it. He had told me that he had been in love with a girl called Caroline, who had rejected him in Cambridge, and had read out to me a poem he had written to her. I think that the double rejection affected him very deeply. He never returned to Cambridge. I tried to invite him to Cambridge when I was there in Clare Hall, but he refused. He said Cambridge is full of ghosts. Bridget and Raymond Alchin went to visit him in Jersey while I was in Cambridge and reported finding him in good spirits. Simon's parents had left him a small fortune, and he did not need to work for a living. He ran an antique shop in London for a while, losing most of the legacy in the process. That forced him to take a paid job for the only time in his life. Curator of a section, I forget its name, in the Ashmolean Museum in Oxford. Getting to his office at 9 a.m. 5 days a week was hard for him. But just then, his last surviving aunt kindly died, leaving him a house in Jersey, a small fortune, a housekeeper and her husband, who grew tomatoes and lettuce, both entirely tasteless, on the farm attached to the house. She also left him an antediluvian yellow car, which moved occasionally. Anyway, that legacy sustained Simon for the rest of his life. On my first visit to Jersey, I was met at the airport by Simon, his housekeeper, who was also his chauffeur, and their yellow jalopy. We made it up the hill. I didn't have to push, but it was close. Simon and I had remained in touch. And then I will briefly refer to the Nepali boy that was referred to by the previous speaker. Not having any relatives, he had adopted a Nepali boy. When I asked him about his adopted son on my second visit to him in Jersey, he said that he was in jail. He was not more forthcoming, and I did not ask any questions. I heard about Simon's death from Achila, then I wrote to Aparna. Thank you very much.
Right. Now we move on to the next generation. We start with Professor John Seyller, who is Professor Emeritus of Art History at the University of Vermont in USA and is an internationally acclaimed authority in Indian painting. He knew Simon for about 20 years and shares his passion for the intricacies of scribal inscriptions and legends on seals, which those of us who have had a chance to read his articles will certainly testify to. He specializes in the book arts produced under the Mughals and has written many articles on the Imperial Painting Workshop as well as in individual manuscripts and their painters. His works include Workshop and Patron in Mughal India, the Freer Ramayana and other illustrated manuscripts of Abdul Rahim, Pearls of the Parrot of India, the Walters Art Museum Khamsa of Mir Khusro of Delhi, The Adventures of Hamza, Painting and Storytelling in Mughal India, and the Syed's collection of Indian miniatures, Mughal and Deccani paintings. Over the past decade, he co-authored with Jagdish Mittal 6 catalogues of painting of various schools in the Jagdish and Kamla Mittal Museum of Indian Art in Hyderabad. In 2020, he was the lead author of a publication on the Ramayana manuscript made for the Mughal Empress Hamida Banu Begum, who was, as you all know, connected with Humayun's tomb and the mother of, was the wife of Humayun. So he will be, incidentally, also giving a lecture, might forget this later, at the IIC again, in these same rooms, on Sunday the 11th, on the art of Meher Chand, copying as a creative act. This was on September 11th at 6:30. So, John, I have great pleasure in inviting you to give the one illustrated piece we have this evening.
You're going to?
नहीं अपन नीचे
पीछे शो करेंगे ना उस पे स्क्रीन पे
चलो Thank you. When Francesca invited me to contribute to the symposium in honor of Simon Digby, I thought of a project that I had started about 1990 that involved a lot of inscriptions and about which I had discussed with Simon over several years, and especially one memorable visit to his house in Jersey. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to put this in the commemorative volume, and then I was asked, because I was in Delhi, to speak a little bit about that today. Let's see. So this gives you an idea of this manuscript that I've reconstructed. That means put together. It's a very little known Mughal manuscript of the Khamsa of Nizami, and it's divided between the Victoria Art Gallery in Bath, the Bodleian Library in Oxford, the School of Oriental and African Studies in London, and the Museum Rietberg. It's an intriguing document, I think, of the waning years of Akbar's reign. It looks like this when I opened it at the Rietberg, and it didn't look quite like any manuscript I had seen at that point, but my point today will be that it does. Let's see. Forward will be. So, as I began to study the Rietberg volume, I started to think of other things that looked like it. Khamsa of Nizami, I pretty much know most of the Mughal manuscripts, and I thought I'd seen this somewhere before in some way. I spent time in the Bodleian and saw there a manuscript that, for which you see the caption cut just a little bit, a seal that's dated 1563, and later on I came to see this portion in Bath that showed that it's a Unvan and Colophon of a portion dated in 1476. So the upshot of this is that there's a long history to this manuscript which received illustrations at the Mughal court in the 1590s. And this is what they look like up close. So we see a very famous kind of scene, polo playing, with these lovers, would-be lovers. And you can see that they're not big, they're not complicated by any means. If you look down below, you can see that the paintings are numbered, which is very helpful when you reconstruct them. And it's also ascribed, which means it says the name of the artist, whose name is Danu. He's very well known to historians. But when I looked at these paintings, I thought, yes, these are by Danu. These are by Danu. They always have a kind of pinched look to them. You see them. But these two don't look like that at all. So I looked around for who they did look like. And fortunately, in Mughal painting, there are lots of ascribed paintings, so we have a very big database of who painted when and what. So I thought, this is by this well-known artist whose name is Mahesh. But it said Danu, but it's by Danu and Mahesh. So I understood from that point that inscriptions tell you some things, but not everything, that you have to use your eyes to corroborate what they say. And as I went through the Rietberg paintings, which you see here in detail, strangely extends into the margin with this folded bit of paper that I'd never seen before. I spent some time looking at this. It says by Dharam Das and numbered 5. And I looked at this painting quite closely, and I thought I saw something here, which is here. Now you have to take my word for this, I guess, because it says, do it by the date of the 15th of Rajab. At the very edge of the painting, in the very, what we call the gutter of the manuscript, is this inscription, which is a work order to the artists who give them a due date, basically. Those things come up, but not usually in such out-of-the-way places. It's the closest I've ever had my nose to a manuscript. Now, this painting I have known for a long time. It was published in 1958. I knew it shortly after that. And you see this painting of, could we dim the lights a little bit? Yeah. A painting of, there we go, of some dogs and a boy lying in the middle of it. And he was being punished by the king, who threw him to the dogs to be eaten alive. So it's a regular painting, nothing spectacular. It says the artist's name, Asi, and it has the painting number 19. But what caught my attention right away was this part that is not part of the regular text written in 4 columns, but this thing here, which is a scribal note. I was working on that in the 80s, and I continued doing that for really the rest of my life. But this is basically what it says. It says, in wrath, this is written right here, in wrath, King Meru threw a youth, bound head and foot, before fierce dogs, but those dogs did not molest him at all. The dogs put their heads between their paws, and the dog keepers were amazed. So somebody, some supervisor, helped the artist know what to paint. They didn't read the text themselves. They couldn't. They probably couldn't read this either, but somebody read it out for them. So they have this idea of what to do. So this is a part of a long-standing interest of mine in workshop practice, how painters went about their business by the due dates and by these kinds of instructive notes from somebody placed above them. So it turns out that these notes occur everywhere in this manuscript. It occurs in other manuscripts too, and these I found in the 80s. This from a very famous manuscript called the Victoria and Albert Museum Akbarnama. And there they are down below, which are written in an informal way about the subject. And they appear on the Chester Beatty Akbarnama, dated a decade later, 1597, or contemporary with the Kamsa. And you see them written here at the very bottom of the painting field, including, it says, make this a double page painting down here. So I'm getting closer and closer to how they worked. So I'll show you now a selection of paintings from the manuscript to show you how this worked in this case. So you see here 2 paintings, a battle scene and another would-be battle scene where 2 armies come together, but somebody intervenes and stops the show. On this one you can see at the very bottom, written clearly but informally and painted around kind of by the artist, this inscription, from 2 directions the armies came arrayed and waited anxiously and made a compact, a truce. And the other one, well, you know where to look now, is above the text block, right, very short inscription here, and it says, what is it? Oh, it says it's basically a battle scene between Iskandar and Dara, right there. So just a simple, you know how to do battles, so that kind of note. And another painting featuring Iskandar starts with an ascription to an artist whose name is Imam Kuli. And there's the painting number 35. So I know where it is in the manuscript. And then there's that thing, that long inscription written just above the text block that the supervisor assumed the artist would paint over, but they, not knowing Persian probably, didn't, they thought it was part of the regular text, so it just nicely painted around it for us. Right up here, and it ran around this. And the long inscription says, in Persian there, in English here, Iskandar comes before Nushaba in the guise of an ambassador, and Iskandar is acknowledged and sits himself on the Pahlavi throne, and with the face of modesty, then it peters out there. So there's a kind of a, Iskandar joins this woman on the throne. as the substance here. Now it says this work is by Imam Kuli, who's relatively lightly known in the 1590s and a little bit thereafter. But the main figure, Iskandar, is not in that style, and I'll show you that in just a moment, but I recognize that style instantly from other paintings ascribed to this guy Madhu. So I knew that he had been instrumental in this painting, though the ascription doesn't say so. And you can see that when you look around the painting, just picking out the good artists' figures from the weaker ones. Good, not so good. Not so good, not so good, not so good. And around here, and maybe back to this artist. So selectively, an artist intervened in this as kind of an informal thing, just like we did up here, who speaks for whom and in what order, and these kinds of things were arranged. So, as I went through these, which were kept in Bristol on loan from this place in Bath, I became more and more intrigued by these kinds of notes and the roster of artists who participated in the project. First thing I was trying to see, and it says Dharam Das, and the painting number there, nicely. I look at the painting up close with my X-ray vision, and saw here at the bottom this thing, just very casually, something all about Iskandar sitting on the throne, and then I kind of lose it. Now, if I were doing this now, I would use higher technology to pull up even more of it, but it's kind of hard to read these things, especially when they're so partially obscured like that. There is another painting here of interest, another battle scene. You see partial writing, just where we expect it to be, down here, and an inscription to an artist whose name is Dharam Das, but just not simply Dharam Das, but Dharam Das Ek Shasta, Ek Dasta, one hand, not his painting hand. So here's the inscription, and you can piece that out up close, and you try to figure out these words from the text proper. So again, it's a kind of a battle scene that's described here, from there to here. And there's the inscription that describes an artist who has one hand. Actually, there are other references to a maimed or crippled kind of a person. Other Dharam Dases are known. So I became aware of Dharam Das, the one-handed artist, as well as another artist, Dharam Das, who had two hands. You can see the difference. The one artist, the one you see here, and the other artist, a very well-known artist, one of the highest artists there, of Dharam Das. Other people had conflated them, put them together, and thought that at some point he had lost his hand and things like this, but that wasn't true. So the final illustration I'll show you is this one here, where Khizr is washing this horse. Again, the inscription neatly written right above the text, not in columns, but just kind of informative thing. And it says, Khizr arrives before the fountain of life. He removes his clothes, washes his head and body, and that proprietor washed the horse and quenched his thirst. So that pretty much follows the prescription of the note in the painting. But this painting is of interest to me because it's ascribed to an artist whose name is Sham. Now I know these artists well. There are more than 100 at the Mughal court at this time, and this Sham is the same as this Sham, who painted for Abdurrahim in a manuscript of the Ramayana. That was the subject of my dissertation and first book. So I thought, if you painted on this manuscript and that manuscript, and this page happens to be dated, then then the manuscript must be done before this, so that he, for a time, worked for Akbar, and then went to work for Abdurrahim. So, my conclusion is this, that this Khamsa of Nizami, which I've reconstructed as much as we can, is understood to be an overlooked work, but it represents a surprisingly large swath of painting done in the Mughal Imperial Workshop in the 1590s. There are other manuscripts of this category. They're not the well-known ones, the Akbarnama, first or second, and even the first Baburnama, but they're second Baburnama, a fifth Baburnama, a sixth Baburnama like this, the Ocean of Story, the Tariq-i Alfi, the third Akbarnama. These are things known really only to specialists. Now, these are kind of fall outside the body of material that we regularly consider when we talk about Akbar period painting. And we normally dwell, as have I, on very luxurious manuscripts, the best of the stuff, where we know the artists and we know the date and we know the kind of top drawer kind of work that these people could do. But this Khamsa is a refurbished manuscript. It's from an earlier time. It's done kind of in a provincial way. The writing is not particularly distinguished, nor is the illumination really. It has paintings that are quite small, interrupted by the text. So in many respects, it's a little old-fashioned, run-of-the-mill kind of work. You don't like to say this if somebody just bought a page from this, but these belong to museums and not people. And even the breakdown of work among artists is not quite this or that. They're not done by a single artist working on the best they can. They're not done by a team of artists working together all the time. They're assigned to a single artist with some help. So we have to kind of modify how we think of this, of the spectrum of Mughal painting. So this becomes a kind of a mid-range, workaday Mughal painting that bounces kind of newcomers and old just in the years before the workshop broke up. And for me, I personally put that around 1600, well before Akbar's death in 1605. And other work I've been doing since then has made it very clear that the cream of the workshop went to work for Prince Salim in Allahabad, who pretended that he was the Padshah. So now we understand that even something like this, scattered across the world, of unremarkable quality, can instruct us into how the Imperial Mughals managed their paintings. They took something old, they added to it, they told them what to do and how to do it, and then they made this thing for the, fifth copy of the Khamsa Nizami in 20 years or something. We don't know why it was middling like this, but it was. So this is what I shared with Simon, was kind of reading these things, these enigmatic notes that no one had ever noticed really before. And this kind of union of codicological things, putting a manuscript together like this, and then kind of connoisseurship to know the artists who were assigned to this work, and then finally to kind of appreciate that and understand it historically in the last years of Akbar's reign. Thank you. We can deal with questions later if you like. as you wish. As later is good. Sure. So you're up then.
That was lovely. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, John. That was really lovely to do. Now, the next speaker, we have
important to translate from Indian languages into English, because such translations bring up things which are better than the opinions of the historians. And so, of course, you know, he wrote this wonderful book called Wonder Tales from India. But I'll just leave it at that. So how does this long note start? With Cambridge, of course. And then he talks about his travels to India within India with his artist Mother Violet, especially in Kashmir. As Narayani said, she painted several paintings which are in his house. And then Simon then made postcards out of them and would often send us greetings. So I've got a couple of them in this impeccable hand, Eid Mubarak. So this 12-page manuscript is also typically, 12-page letter is typically Simon. It talks about Aparna Mehta, who then becomes Basu. And it says, among other things, I taught Gyanendra Pandey to read Urdu. You know, so this is the way in which he did. This is a part of a curriculum waiting that he sent to me to convey parts of it to Jamia Hamdard so they can use it in their citation. So this, in some ways, really sums up Simon, you know, willing to give information about himself and helping scholars with all sorts of things. Now, he travels through India, and the War Horse book, one of the reasons that is published from Lahore, I think Karachi, is because on one of his travels, Simon got caught in the middle of the 1971 war. So he couldn't move out of Pakistan. And so he writes about that as well. And so he got this manuscript published into this first edition. Later on, when he came to India, and he went with me to OUP to sign another contract for this book, which had a long introductory preface, where he kind of very politely took other people apart, especially those who didn't cite Farsi sources directly, but gave English translation. I don't have to mention the name of such people. The range of Simon was phenomenal. Sufis and Yogis is a mimeographed paper which has gone, you know, several editions. This was presented in London, and in this curriculum vitae, he also says which paper was occasioned by which, you know, conference or invitation. So there are various versions of Sufis and Yogis, which is this encounter between the yogi and the Sufi, where the Sufi emerges victorious by various miracles and so on and so forth. Then there are entries in the Indian Economic and Socialist Review. This is this incredible paper which ran into two parts by Tapan Ray Chaudhary, which is called Dreams and Reminiscences of Dattu Sarvani, a Soldier of Fortune. And it was looking at it subsequently that he's a very important point. He says that the dreams that this person has reflects on the kind of social tensions that were, because the dreams point out sometimes the Jalali aspect of a saint, and because you get in the dream that you must visit this dargah, especially in this case of Baraich of Sayyid Salar Masood, and he doesn't, and all the afflictions that befell him. Sufis and Soldiers in Aurangzeb Deccan is another very, very major work. I'm not a medievalist, but it was, various versions of this were left at my house, including a glossary volume which never was published. Not only that, Simon also drew the title page of the book with this dargah. So the final version, he says 2000 whatever it is, Amin SD collection, has actually the cover drawing also by Simon. He wrote short pieces as well on various topics. In fact, he actually wrote two very nice short pieces for India International Quarterly. One is the idea of the boy wanderer, which goes into Kim, and the other is called Kipling and Indian India Office Library. And it's an incredible piece. He starts off by saying that Kipling gave the idea that what he was writing was all from experience. He didn't really rely on any books. He says that that Kim and I traveled the whole of the Grand Trunk Road. And then he says that there is a description of a ritual, a magical ritual in Kipling. And then he cites from Kipling's autobiography that there was one book that I wanted to steal from the India Office Library, but they keep receipts over there. This is Kipling's autobiography. And from there, Simon then goes on to say what this book would have been. And this is popular magic and superstition and so on. And he says, and he gets the pages, this is from Hertog's, the popular Islam in the Deccan. And he then quotes the actual ritual described in the book, and then how Kipling then uses that to write in a particular way. So that that's another of Simon's great interest. Just a little piece which brings all the scholarship that one can really think about. Now, the travels of Simon's were incredible, and they were constitutive of what he wrote. His other major interest, apart from classical paintings and manuscript, was what Narayani perhaps referred to, is the interest in popular culture. In his house in Jersey, as you went up the stairs to the bedrooms, on those stairs was tagged copies of Ala Udal, published from Hathras, and cassettes of Indian film songs. I don't know which year it was that he invited me to his house, because I wrote a book which refers to a medieval saint, and I don't read any Farsi, so Simon is my guru in that. And as I was climbing up the stairs, I look at some of these, and I just seen the film Sardari Begum, in which there is this song, Chahe maar dalo Raja, chahe kaat dalo Raja. And I said, look, I just heard Simon had a tape of that film song, and he then played it to me. So, this person could move from reading Farsi manuscripts to Hathras, the Pahlwan with, Adar Udal ki kahani, to, keeping these cassettes. On another occasion at my house, there was some, I think Anubhuti Maurya was also there. There was some discussion about a film. And my father said, well, it was in 1953. And Simon said, no, it was 1954. So then I went up and picked up Raja Dhyaksha's, the encyclopedia of Indian films. And sure enough, Simon was right. So, meaning, these are the things that really enabled all of us who who worked with him. There's Anubhuti sitting over there. She used to live next door to me, and Simon would come and stay at our place. She was working on Kashmir. And Simon had brought this beautiful catalog of this major exhibition in Asia Society in New York on Kashmir, and had this beautiful piece on art. So he just loaned this book to Anubhuti and through me, and I'm still waiting for it to come back. So this is Simon. I want to just come to his last days. Yeah, one more thing about India International Center. He was a member, but never stayed at the center because he was very annoyed about the center charging him the fee for foreigners. And though he was a member and we found on the veranda, he never stayed over here. He would stay at 39 Prithviraj Road, and which is very near the Sabdajang tomb. Then, in the last year, he moved to a flat in West Nizamuddin, very near the Dargah. And suddenly, he started feeling unwell. In fact, having lunch at IIC, he felt unwell. And then I went to meet him. I took Anubhuti along, and we suggested that he just take a trip. And so, about 5-6 days, 10 days before that, he put on his raw silk jacket and went for 4 days to Fatehpur Sikri. When he came back, he was not well at all. And he was admitted to Apollo Hospital. I went to see him, and what did I see? 4 volumes, Orient Black Pond paperback edition of Jaduna Sarkars, fall and decline of the Mughal Empire. A lot of us were there soon after he passed away, but before that, he was looked after by Salman Haider and Martand Singh, who were very close to him. And after he passed away, perhaps it was in the will, or they told him, or he was told, that he wished to be cremated. And we took him to the Lodi crematorium, and actually his wish was to be, his ashes to be dispersed into a river, unnamed river. And Martand Singh and Salman Haider drove all the way to Gadmukteshwar to disperse his ashes in the Ganges. There were other things that I could talk about. His incredible memory. When I was working on this manuscript, near Barabanki, there is a place called Satrik. And it figures in the account of this warrior saint. And I said, I can't understand what Satrik is. He said, well, it is Saptarishi. And go and look at this paper by Kosambi on Brahmin Gotras. And I went there, and sure enough, that was it, just lying, just off the cuff. So that was Simon Digby. When he passed away, he left behind 2 trunks in our house, which is a big house. And when Richard Harris came back to look at his belongings, and he took some papers, but what was most very interesting was that the biggest thing over there was a complete road map of India. That is Simon, who just traveled whenever, wherever he wanted to go. He would always go to Kulu for Dashera, and once he told me that he's going to Daman to watch at to see some boats. And the collection of photographs that he has is incredible. And then, they are not captioned, but it is an incredible collection. He was very, very considerate towards younger scholars. Towards the end, he had problem with both the knees, but I took a former student, now a lecturer in this university, to him, and that he wanted to visit Mehrauli. He took us to Andheriya Moor, walked us right through, meanwhile picked up a pamphlet, some Rani Dalpat or something like that, and gave it to this person. And so that was it. I'm not a medievalist, so I can't, talk about his other, his really important work. But I dedicated my book to Simon with a share from Farag Gorakhpuri, and I'll recite that. दिया खामोश है लेकिन किसी का दिल तो जलता है. दिया खामोश है लेकिन किसी का दिल तो जलता है. चले आओ जहाँ तक रोशनी मालूम होती है. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shahid. Bring him back to us. Now we have the, right at the end, the best piece, which is Francesca introducing the book, which is the result of the conference held to honor Simon, and gives you a sense of the research of other people which, in a way, were inspired by or are similar to the kind of interest that Simon himself had. Yeah.
Sorry, I know that it's very late and that we're going to. Sorry? No, I don't want to take too much of your time, but I'll tell you a little bit about the book. Again, I'm not a medievalist, and I only met Simon Digby, in fact, only once, when I invited him to a conference that was inspired by his wonderful paper before Timur came in London in 2006. Through his good friend and my friend Aditya Bell, the late Aditya Bell. So I used to hear about Simon Digby from Aditya, and particularly, of course, about his interest in stories and Sufism, and his great insight into them. And so, in fact, the book that came out of the conference is called After Timur Left, and that was very much inspired by Simon, who gave the first keynote from little bits of paper, which we then reconstructed because he didn't live until before the book came out. And so when Richard Harris, after Simon passed away, came to say, well, I'd like to do something for either his books or in honor of him, I was of course delighted, and I must thank Shahid and of course our friend Sunil Kumar, who is also a contributor to the book, for pulling together, and of course is no more with us, very sadly, for putting together the idea for the conference, and then I'll show you just the 10 volumes of his collected essays. So, and I want to again thank Shahid and Narayani for making this event possible, because this book came out in February, and I thought it would just disappear in the without any notice. So I'm very glad that all now got to hear about Simon Digby as a historian and also about this book. So, as you've heard, he was a very original scholar, and I think the idea of the book, and as you will see his collected works, is that often people know only one part of his work. So the art historians know about his art history, the economic historians about his work on coinage or on long-distance trade, those interested in Sufism, his work on Sufism, and so on. So instead the idea was, let's bring together scholars that can illuminate all the different facets of his work. And as you can see, I was very glad that we have work on coin and long distance trade, coins and the Book of Jewels. This is also a work, in fact, a translation that Simon had started, and that Bruce Bonnell, I think, has finished. Unfortunately, he also passed away. It was a bit of a kind of a there was a curse on this book, perhaps. But anyway, so coins and long distance trade, those working on economic history will remember his chapters for the Cambridge Economic History of India. Then a chapter by Jim Madison on Untitled Yogis, and three again, Sufis have been of course worked on, but I think Simon was one of the first, or a precursor, in terms of seeing them as really as historical agents and as not just kind of religious masters or religious figures. And he was interested in both the very local Sufis as well as the important ones. Then, if you look at his bibliography, he has quite a number of articles about the identification of a place name or a name. Is it Iltutmish or Iletmish? Is it Khwaja Gurg or Khwaja Karak? And so, from this very, and of course, as we've heard, the brilliance of his scholarship is that he could go from, okay, the tomb of Bahlol Lodi, or how did Bahlol Lodi, come to the throne, or left Delhi, the precise events and where exactly did he go, which route did he take, to a much larger view of social history, economic history, the political dynamics. I think he's still one of the very few historians who's worked on Afghans and taken Afghans, not just the dynasties, the Lodians, but what happened to them afterwards, what happened to them at the local level, seriously. So we have words and etymologies, we have Sufis, we have travelers. We've heard how much he was interested in travelers and travels, and tales, which was also my part. And we thought that method, so we asked, and in fact we heard here an example through John Seyller's presentation of how he could combine not just scholarship and knowledge, but really different methods that are required. But their own method, this will be a work that is useful. And I brought here, just to give you a little sense. So for about a year or 6 months, I had 16 boxes of his archive in my living room. And they included, several boxes of his cards. So this is I don't know if you can see it, but this is the box called Sufi. And it has appearances, Aurangzeb end, bibliography, clientele, currency. So all linking Sufis, and each, these are cards about Hindi and language, and each of them has a little quote, where it is taken from. And you can see that these were really the building blocks, the small building blocks of a very large body of work. Shahid has also mentioned translations. He was very proud, and I think this hopefully will be also published at some point, but I think we need somebody to come forward and do it. He had found a variant of Barani's history, Tarikh-e Firuz Shahi. You can see here he copied it. You can see, with his own variants, with his own notes. There were about 20 little exercise books of the ones you buy in any shop, with translations, that he clearly did translations every day. Wherever he was, he would translate a story, he was very interested, again, in a kind of 19th century way, interested in variants of the same story, the Nepali version, the Sri Lankan version, and he translated as much as he could. So quite incredible, really. And just to finish these, so the order, in fact, is the order in which probably they will be published, which is not a logical order, but in a sense it's the order of what is easier to bring out first. This is work done by Dr. David Lunn at SOAS, who was the Simon Digby Fellow for several years. And he typed in and collected and arranged and sort of revised and reviewed all the articles that we found, and we thought we could, could be put in volumes. And so a new edition of Sufis and Soldiers and that companion volume that Shahid has mentioned. So his handbook and his kind of commentary to the text. Then his various unfinished work, but incredibly original work on the Afghans. So including the work, the essay on Dattu Sarvani. He had a book on the kingdom, the small kingdom of Bhatta, that wasn't unfinished, but whatever whatever stage it has arrived on will be there. A reissue of War Horse and Elephant. And then 2 volumes on Sufis. He's got various articles on Sufis and intoxicants, Sufis and levitation, Sufis and particular Sufis. A very important article that I drew a lot on Abdul Quddus Gangohi, this sort of Sufi who ended up his life in Gangoh. Sufis and Yogis, which Shahid has also mentioned, and then more general, the small pieces and larger pieces about North Indian sultanates. Because again, I think, this was in fact part of the reason of that volume after Timur left, is that everybody thinks about the Mughals, but actually, there were several centuries of sultanate who both in Delhi and then in the rest of North and Central India before that. And Simon was really the unparalleled historian of Sultanate India. I don't think anybody had the range of knowledge and insight from the minutiae to the large scale. A volume will be of his various writings that, again, Shahid mentioned on his interest in sahibs, his interest in spies and travelers, including travels to Ladakh, travels to China, travel across India, his own translations, typically from Persian, but also as a Portuguese traveler. In a volume, a companion volume to Wonder Tales of South Asia about stories and a bit miscellanea, and then his important articles on art objects, silver. He was interested in fact, in the volume, sorry if I can go back, very interesting article by Andrew Topsfield, his friend Andrew Topsfield at the Ashmolean, Simon Digby himself as a collector, with not much money, but a very good eye, as you can imagine, and able to understand what was, valuable, but also interested in things that art historians usually are not interested in. So popular, he's got a wonderful article on playing cards, for example, Book of Omens, where the language is very different from, the language that you find in other kinds of manuscripts. So his own interest as a collector, and his paintings and illustrated manuscripts are all in the Ashmolean Museum and the Simon Digby Memorial Charity has also money available if people want to go and study anything related to Simon Digby's work. So this is it. This is OUP. Again, I must thank very much Shahid. I must remember and thank Sunil for making time, for sharing whatever material they had, for keeping up the enthusiasm. This is a project that has taken already quite a long time. The conference from which the book came draws was in 2014. But all these books, all the texts are now ready. So hopefully within the next couple of years, we'll start seeing, if not all of them, at least some of them. And we hope that by publishing, them together, then, the full stature, the full contribution, and the range of, scholarship of Simon Digby will be, clear to the world. Thank you. Yes, sure. Yeah, so and this is the launch. I think now Narayani and I hold up the book.
I just reminded her.
And John contributed, so this was part of this article. Thank you very much for coming.
What Francesca cheated me off was that she came up so swiftly that I couldn't say anything about her.
You told me that people are also.
So I'm going to inflict that on you now. Yeah. Francesca, for those who do not know, is Professor Emerita of Hindi and South Asian Literature at SOAS and Fellow of the British Academy. And she has written books which we should all be reading: The Hindi Public Sphere, Print and Pleasure. Then the third one I love, Hinglish with an H. It's not Cockney, it's Hinglish Live with Ravikant of CSDS. And she has edited a book called Love in South Asia, A Cultural History, Before the Divide, Hindi and Urdu Literary Cultures, and is working on a truly impressive project on multilingual locals and significant geographies, an approach to world literature from the perspective of North India, the Maghreb, and the Horn of Africa. I mean, the Maghreb is something I heard in France a lot, but it's lovely. This will be wonderful. And of course, she is the editor and the hardest worker in producing this book, which will soon be available in, this is still a pre-publication copy, but it's available now. Are they selling it outside?
Yes, they are.
Oh, they are selling copies outside, so if any of you wants to have a look at them. Thank you so much. Do we want any questions? Does anybody have something very important to say? Because otherwise the IIC lock us all in. So. Yes, that's it then. I'm sorry. You can always have afterthoughts later. Thank you so much, all of you. Thank you for coming and boosting our morale. And I'm sure you enjoyed it as much as I did. Sure.